Now let's just wallow in happiness of new books. Okay, hello! We're going to be doing a book haul today, but I'm very conscious about doing this when we're in a cost of living crisis, because I don't want anyone to think that we need to be spending money on books all the time. It's lovely to be able to buy books, if you can. It's lovely to be able to support authors by pre-ordering. It's lovely to support indie publishers by buying indie published books, but we must remember that we can't, and most of the books that I'm going to be talking about today are secondhand, were gifts, or I bought them as part of my university course. Now let's just wallow in happiness of new books. So this is going to be a book haul in parts because I have some really special books that I want to tell you about. Books that I bought for myself, either for my course or in a secondhand bookshop that I'll talk about then. I've then got my Secret Santa gift. So I took part in the Secret Santa exchange through Kieran's Discord over at KD Books, and somehow I've ended up with 4 parcels, which I think is one of them I think has more than one book in it. So I don't know. I'm hoping they just pick books off their shelf to send me, rather than spending that much, because there was a £10 limit. But anyway, we'll talk about that in a minute. And I'm opening that because we're 2 days till Christmas and I don't want to open them with my family. I want to open them with you. So I thought I'll open them now with you guys. Not that I don't want to open them with my family. Just I wanted to open them with you guys, and then I have asked for a few books from my family as Christmas presents. I generally tend to ask for books I've already read that I know I'll love, or books that I'm really excited about that I haven't been able to get from my library to try first. So that bit will come later, but let's start with the books that I'm really really special books. And I don't actually know where to start here, but I'm going to go chronologically with when I received them. So the first one is Peach by Emma Glass. So I read Rest and Be Thankful by Emma Glass earlier this year and absolutely fell in love with it. It was just so beautiful, so poetic. I even made a darkroom print that was inspired by that book, which I then reached out to Emma and said, look, I've made this and I'd love to send it to you as a gift. And I sent it with a letter with my thoughts on the book and all the things that it brought up for me. And so she sent me a copy of her first book along with her own handwritten note, which I'm keeping in it. And I don't know, there's just something about that just makes me want to cry almost. I'm bunged up anyway because of everyone being sick. That's not me just crying, but I could cry. But yeah, I'm keeping that with the book. It's a very short one, so I'm hoping to read it very soon, I've already got quite a few reading plans over Christmas, but yeah, I want to get to that one soon. What I'm kind of hoping to do is put the next couple of books into a reading blog and just read some of the really special books that I've received. I don't think there could be anything more wonderful than connecting with other creatives working in other mediums and collaborating that way. I just love that. The next one is called Vanishing Monuments by John Elizabeth Stintsey, who I think watches my other channel, Analog Holly, which is all about my analog photography pursuits. And he reached out to me to say that when I sort of posted videos where I showed that I was making prints based on books and how much I love reading, he then reached out to me to say that he's an author who's also interested in analog photography. He has a couple of published works. So this is a novel. He's also got poetry published. And again, he's put a little note in there. He even sent it on Halloween, so it's got a little pumpkin in it. In fact, I should tell you what these are about. So Peach is a teenage girl like any other. She has college and her friends and her parents and the new baby and her lovely boyfriend Green. She has her friends Sandy and Sid the cat and homework to do. But something has happened, something unspeakable, and the world has become unfamiliar, fractured into strange textures and patterns. Reeling through her refracted universe, Peach knows that the people she loves are in danger, real danger. If she is not to be swallowed whole, Peach must summon all her courage and find something nameless and strange that lies within her. Vanishing monuments. When the monument vanishes, what still stands? Alani Baum, a non-binary photographer and professor, hasn't seen their mother since they ran away from home with their girlfriend at 17, almost 30 years ago. But then Alani learns that their mother's dementia has worsened and appears to have taken away her ability to speak. Now Alani is suddenly running away again, only this time they're running toward their mother. At the empty house where they grew up, Alani attempts to tie up the loose ends of their mother's life while grappling with painful memories. Ultimately, they're forced to confront the fact that any closure they hope to get from this homecoming will have to be manufactured. This beautiful, tenderly written debut explores what haunts us most, bearing witness to grief over not only what is lost but also what remains. So, I'm like, when he reached out to say he wanted to send me that, honestly, these sorts of things just make me want to cry. So the final book in this little section is my own book. This is the book that I have been working on for like 2 years. Photography through the pandemic. I worked on it with 35mmc, so I'm friends with Hamish, who runs 35mmc. I worked for 35mmc for a little bit before I went back to university, and this is a project we've been working on since December after the pandemic started, so December 2020. I reached out to him with this idea for a little zine of work from different photographers about how the pandemic has affected them, whether it's provided them with inspiration or whether it's completely scuppered their working life, so both hobbyists, professionals, anyone. And I just wanted to bring people together into a zine. And when I started reaching out to people, the response was so phenomenal that we very quickly realised it was going to be a book rather than a zine. But a book is a lot more expensive to produce and create, and takes a lot of time. I had to learn a whole new technology. I'm not a digital artist, so I have never really worked with those sorts of publishing softwares, but I learned it all. I designed this myself, and yeah, so we've got the work of photographers from all over the world. This is about analog photography, so we have people who shoot film, we have people working with, Polaroids and instant film. We have people working with, this is wet plate collodion, and then the accompanying text, obviously, which talks about the people in it who have, like, their experience, what it meant to them, whether they created like big projects with, I mean, this is one of my favourites. This is Eric Norris and Daphne the poodle, and it was about how he just ended up taking loads of pictures of his dog and it becoming like this whole thing. And like, this is what I mean, like, we had things like this where it was deeply personal. Like, I ended up with a series of pictures of my dog to people who had gone to photograph frontline workers and people who had created very serious posed bodies of work around the pandemic. So like Carrie Janusek, who created this one with a plague doctor in it. Yeah, so we have 50 photographers in here, and then me, I did the introduction. This is a really special book to me. This is something we did through Kickstarter. I am honestly blown away by how many people have asked me where they can purchase a copy of the book. You can't. We did a Kickstarter campaign, and that was the only place where you could buy. So if you purchased then, you got a copy of the book, and it also funded each of the 50 contributors to have their own copy of the book as well. If we get enough demand for a copy, we may consider printing some more, but as it stands, it is a one-off printing. But yeah, I am really grateful to everyone who's come to me and said that they'd like a copy, because I am noting down names in case we ever get enough to do another one. But that was, I mean, we're still sending out copies. There are still a few addresses that we haven't received from people to send copies over to them. It's been 2 years. 2 years to create something that was originally supposed to be this little zine. But anyway, let's move on to the next one. And we have the books that I bought for myself. Now, I was in a secondhand shop for the majority of these, and I wanted to add some books to my collection. So something that I have been trying out lately is short stories. Over the last couple of years, I've read a few collections. The thing with short stories, though, is that because you have so many stories in one book, there's inevitably going to be ones you like and ones you don't like. And so I feel less compelled to read those than, say, a novel or a novella, where if you don't like it, you just DNF rather than move on to another story. But anyway, there have been some absolute blinders that I've read. So I am still sort of trying out short stories, and I'm going to, in the new year, when I have some more time to do some filming, I want to do a video about some of the best short story collections I've read and some of the ones that are still on my TBR, because, yeah, there are some really good ones. The first lot is all from this same like Penguin collection. But I've got short stories by D.H. Lawrence. I have read Lady Chatterley's Lover, and I remember liking it, but I can't really remember much about it. It was quite a while ago that I read that. So I was interested to read some of his short stories, see if I like him generally as an author. I've got Graham Greene. I have never read a Graham Greene, but it is one of the authors that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie recommends. And after having loved her short story, The Visit, I decided I was on the lookout for something Graham Greene, so I picked up his short story collection. I've got Daphne du Maurier, The Blue Lenses and Other Stories. I have read Rebecca. Didn't love it the way some people do, but I thought Daphne du Maurier is a seriously talented writer, and I borrowed from my mum, my cousin Rachel, to read as well, so I got the short stories as well. And then I've got Susan Hill, The Albatross. I want to read some Susan Hill because obviously everyone loves Susan Hill and she's an author I'm really intrigued by. And then finally, from a different collection, look, someone's even spilt their tea or coffee on this. I've got Kate Chopin, The Awakening. I have actually read some Kate Chopin before. I used to have a short story collection from her, but I don't know where it's gone. I don't know whether I accidentally cleared it out when I moved house. But I loved her short stories. They were one of the first short story collections I ever read. So when I saw The Awakening in the charity shop, I was like, yes, I would like another Kate Chopin. So, or Chopin, or however you pronounce her name. I don't know. So there we go. Those are the short story collections I got from that secondhand bookshop. I've then got some secondhand non-fiction. Now, these two are not for my course, but they are course adjacent. So I've got Umberto Eco's Misreadings. We've been learning a lot about post-structuralism, postmodernism, myth and mythologies like Roland Barthes, and so Umberto Eco is like a key name in that sort of critical theory, literary theory. So I picked up this when I saw it. I have a few of his fiction books that I want to read as well. I've borrowed The Name of the Rose from my dad, who had that on his shelf, and then kindly Kieran from KD Books sent me Plague Letters. I paid for it. I paid him for it, but he sent that to me as well. So I've got some books by Umberto Eco that I really want to read, and so that's a non-fiction bit from him. And then similarly to the whole mythologies by Roland Barthes, which I'm really interested in, I've got Rosalind Coward, Female Desire, Women's Sexuality Today, which from what I understand is a similar concept where she is picking out these ideas of female sexuality and then exploring them in the way that Roland Barthes does in mythologies, really sort of unpicking the iconography and the connotations and denotations of things. So I'm looking forward to reading that one as well. Okay, this one's slightly different. So I've got John Ronson's So You've Been Publicly Shamed. Now this one's a bit harder to explain, but essentially I have this idea for something I would like to write. A piece of non-fiction based on something I've experienced recently, but I want to approach it from a researcher perspective. So going into the subject as a novice and using it as a project to deepen my own understandings, but also hopefully build some bigger thinkings and draw in academic work from other people to create a bigger project. And I also want to include some of my own photography in it, because obviously I'm an analog photographer as well. And from what I understand from hearing other people's reviews of John Ronson's work is that that's how he approaches his books. He goes into them not really knowing. He has this thing that he's like, I'm really interested in this subject, and then he will delve into that topic and teach himself, and through teaching himself teach the reader and engage the reader. So that's why I picked this up again in that same charity shop. That's sort of the way that I'm hoping to approach my own project, and I thought reading this might give me some inspiration on going about it. So okay, and then finally in what I've actually bought myself, I have two that I did buy brand new. Now these we are using, I can't remember which one it is, but in my course we're going to be looking at one of these. So we've got Feminism, a graphic guide, and Gender, a graphic guide, but it's a topic that I'm really interested in, and I always knew I was interested in feminism and gender studies going into this, but I think doing the course and doing these modules has really pushed that more to the fore. I'm really fascinated by the theory behind it, by the different views that people within the same, all these people who think of themselves as feminists, the different standpoints that they can have on the same issues. And these ones are recommended as part of my course, and I think it's just a really nice way to present the information. So not only am I hoping to get a lot out of this, but I hope that one day having these on my shelves will be good for my sons to read when they're old enough to understand these concepts. But yeah, so it's very much, as I say, they're graphic guides, so it's really beautifully presented. So that was the feminism one, and then over here we have the gender. Reading gender across space and time. Sex and gender, how it works, how social norms shape our sex and gender, masculinity and shame. Like, yeah, I'm just hoping that not only for me but for my kids as well, these will be really good books. Look at this. I have these. So I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That was ripping open, I'm sorry. Oh, so there's 5 parcels, but I actually think this one here feels like 2 books. But so I thought I'd open these with you. These are, I can't actually, because when the parcels came, this came as like 4 different parcels, and I was like, surely the postage cost as much as our budget for, because the budget was £10. The budget for expenditure on each other was £10. So I'm really surprised to have received this many books. I'm excited, but I wanted to talk as well about the person I bought for. So I went on to so you could set like a little wish list, Elfster we did it through. And what I was hoping to find was a book that I had really enjoyed on that list, because that's the one I wanted to buy. And they had on their wish list Jen Campbell's short story collection, The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night, which I loved. I think that was the best short story collection I read this year. I think that is. So I wanted to buy that one, but it wasn't available. Like when I went through to the shop, because we were doing it through Blackwell's, because the person I was purchasing for was in the US or Canada. So we were using Blackwell's because you can do free international free shipping because they're in any country. But that book wasn't available. I even tried going on other shops to see if I could get a copy sent, but no, couldn't. But so I looked through the rest of the list to see the sorts of books that were being recommended. There were a few on there that I have on my TBR that I'd like to read, but none that I actually knew that I liked. But they also said that they'd love to receive something that you've read that you've loved, or a recommendation that you have for them. So having seen what they've put on their wish list, I came up with a few ideas in my head of books that I've loved this year that sort of matched the sort of theme from their wish list. And then I found them on Goodreads, and they do seem to be active on Goodreads. So I typed in their read books to see if the books that I had on my list they've already read or not. And they hadn't, it seems. So I have sent a book that I loved from this year to that person, and I hope they love it. But I've sent one book because I can't afford to send more than one book. And yet I have all these to open. So I'll open this first one that's Come Undone. Oh, Pine. Now this is what I have had on my intrigue list. Like I've been wanting to read this. I think it's horror, and I want to read more creepy horror. Oh, and set in the Highlands. Oh, I love a Scotland story. Right. Anyway, Lauren and her father Niall live alone in the Highlands in a small village surrounded by pine forests. When a woman stumbles out onto the road one Halloween night, Niall drives her back to their house in his pickup. In the morning, she's gone. In a community where daughters rebel, men quietly rage, and drinking is a means of forgetting, mysteries are not quite out of the ordinary. Locked doors and stone circles, the disappearance of Lauren's mother a decade ago. Lauren looks for answers in her tarot cards, hoping she might one day be able to read her father's turbulent mind. Neighbours know more than they let on, but when a local teenager goes missing, it's no longer clear who she can trust. Ooh. And it's got French flaps with lovely pine trees on the inside jacket. That sounds good. I love creepy horror. Thank you. Okay, the next one. Also, I love the dinosaurs, by the way. Oh, so this was one that was actually on my wish list. Normal People by Sally Rooney, one of my favourite books I read this year. So that's the thing. Most of the books that I put on my wish list for both, like for this Secret Santa and also for Christmas, are books that I've read this year or in previous years and loved, but I didn't own a physical copy. Whether I listened to them on audio, read them on my Kindle, or borrowed them from the library, I wanted like a physical copy to have on my shelf to annotate and, you know, really pour my love into. So that's excellent to have that one. Right, next one. Ooh, Filthy Animals by Brandon Taylor. I have never heard of this. Ooh, the first collection of stories from the author of Real Life, shortlisted for the 2020 Booker Prize and winner of the Foyle's Fiction Book of the Year. Ooh, okay, so we've got another short story collection. In the linked stories at the heart of Filthy Animals, a young man tentatively re-engages with the world. Recently discharged from hospital, Lionel meets two dance students at a party. Charles and Sophie's relationship is difficult to read, but Lionel is drawn to them both. As he navigates their sexually fraught encounters, he is forced to weigh his vulnerabilities against his loneliness and to consider his return to life. Elsewhere, a little girl runs wild to the consternation of her childminder. Unspoken frictions among a group of teenagers come to a vicious head on a winter night, and a woman dreads a first date only to find that something has cracked open. What connects these stories is the tension between the surface of things and the intensity of our inner worlds. Ooh, with exquisite empathy, Brandon Taylor shows that though violence hovers at the edge of many encounters, so too does tenderness and love. Sorry, my nose is so blocked up I can barely speak. Okay, I've never heard of this, but I'm very excited. And as I've just said, really into short stories, so that's amazing. Thank you. This is the one that I think is 2 books. And I was right, it's 2 books. So this is another one I had on my list, Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. I listened to this on audiobook earlier this year, and I absolutely loved it. So this one is like a thriller, but like a psychological thriller, but it's literary fiction. So the ending is very ambiguous. You don't know whether there is like this apocalyptic event that's happened or not. You've got no idea. I thought it's like an in fact it says, a page turner taking in themes of isolation, race and class. Yeah, it's an isolated thriller, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And I wanted a copy to annotate and pour my love into. So thank you for those 2. The other one in here is Hurricane Season. And I think this is my first ever Fitzcarraldo edition I've ever owned. I have heard of this, definitely heard of this, but I don't know what it's about. So let's see. Oh, translated by Sophie Hughes. So it's by Fernanda Melchor and translated by Sophie Hughes. Ooh, The Witch is Dead. Ooh. After a group of children playing near the irrigation canals discover her decomposing corpse, the village of La Matosa is rife with rumours about how and why this murder occurred. As the novel unfolds in a dazzling linguistic torrent, oh my word, Fernanda Melchor paints a moving portrait of lives governed by poverty and violence, machismo and misogyny, superstition and prejudice. Written with an infernal lyricism that is as affecting as it is enthralling, Hurricane Season, Melchor's first novel to appear in English, is a formidable portrait of Mexico and its demons, brilliantly translated by Sophie Hughes. I mean, I am very excited to read a book that is described as dazzling linguistic torrent. So super excited about that. Thank you. And then we come to the final one, which is another one that got a bit damaged in transit, but I still don't know what it is because it's just the edges. But this is the thickest one. Oh, Salt Lick by Lulu Allison. Now I've definitely heard of this one. This one has been talked about so much, but I still don't actually know what it's about. I'm really annoyed because for some reason my camera cut out while I was in the middle of filming this last book, which was Salt Lick by Lulu Allison. So it says, Britain is awash, the sea creeps into the land, brambles and forests swamp derelict towns. Food production has moved overseas and people are forced to move to the cities for work. The countryside is empty. A chorus, the herd voice of feral cows, wander this newly wild land, watching over changing times, speaking with love and exasperation. Jesse and his puppy, Mr. Malix, roam the woods until his family are forced to leave for London. Lee runs from the terrible restrictions of the white town where he grew up. Isolde leaves London on foot, walking the abandoned A12 in search of the truth about her mother. So this sounds very dystopian, but very much dystopian in line with environmental issues. And I recently read Sealed by Naomi Booth, which is like a dystopian horror, which is about like this illness, and people are like moving out of towns and stuff because they're like so terrified of this illness. They want to like get away, and I like, just from reading the back of this, I get the same vibes of like using the environment and using environmental factors to build a dystopian world, to build what's going on. It also gives me the vibes of The Children of Men by P.D. James, which is about the drop in fertility. So that like no new babies are born, and it's about like the aging population and how that population is surviving when there's no like young people to do the work and those sorts of things. So it gives me those sorts of almost melancholic dystopian vibes rather than like thrillery, like action dystopian vibes. And I think I quite like that. I like that idea of like almost feeling the melancholy of a changing world. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to reading that. I recently watched Reading Riley. I think her name is Elizabeth, the YouTube creator behind Reading Riley. She did a best dystopian, like her dystopian recommendations video. I got a few new ones for myself. I gave her some of my favourite ones, and yeah, obviously, and there are some we have in common that we both loved. I'm now thinking I might do one of those in the new year as part of my filming plans for when my kids go back to school and I can actually film in peace again. I'm thinking I might do a best my favourite dystopians. And then also what's on my TBR, because I have quite a few on my TBR as well. So yeah, if you'd be interested in that, let me know. So the next thing you'll see, we'll be moving to the future, and we'll be talking about Christmas. No, I have forgotten something. So I had 3 credits left on my Audible, and I have a love-hate relationship with audiobooks because I much prefer reading physically. I don't disagree with the idea of listening to books, but I just always find that I prefer books in their written in like physical format. But because I now have to commute to university and I have to drive, there's no option for me to get public transport. I live too far out in the countryside to get into university in time using public transport. I'm very upset about it as well. Don't even go there. But anyway, so if I want to like read a book on my commute, it has to be an audiobook in the car. And so I was looking back over the last year and which audiobooks I actually really enjoyed. One of them actually was Leave the World Behind by Ruben Alarm. But in general, I have enjoyed Stephen King. I've now listened to two of his audiobooks, 2 of his books read on audio. The first one was Under the Dome, and then the second one was The Institute. I've also already got The Shining just The Shining. So I went through my like wish list on Storygraph to see which Stephen King books I've like noted as wanting to read. So I've now also got Misery, Salem's Lot, and Pet Sematary, I think, all on my Audible. So technically those are new to me as well, but they were my Audible credits that I had remaining. So yeah. Now the next bit you're going to see is what I got for Christmas. Merry Christmas! So, here we come to the Christmas portion. And I'm going to start with the books that I knew I was getting. The books I'd actually asked for. And then we'll come on to some of the surprises that some of my family members bought for me. The first one I want to start with is one I read this year and loved, which is The Mad Women's Ball by Victoria Mass. Translated from the French by Frank Wynne. So I read this back in like April, flew through it, loved it, knew I needed my own copy. So I asked for this one, and I'm very happy that I received it. Next we have a short story collection. This is the Decameron Project. 29 new stories from the pandemic, selected by the editor of the New York Times magazine. So when reality is surreal, only fiction can make sense of it. So this is an anthology with a simple time-spanning goal to gather a collection of stories written as our current pandemic first swept the globe. How might new fiction from some of the finest writers working today help us memorialise and understand the unimaginable, and what could be learned about how this crisis will affect the art of fiction? So kind of like the photography book I was showing you that I made, this is somebody gathering together stories from the early days of the pandemic. So yes, I'm happy to add another short story collection to my TBR. The next one I have to show you is the second book in a series, Hollow City, which is the second of the Miss Peregrine's Peculiar Children series. This is a book, I'm sure most people have heard of it, but it's one that blends storytelling with found photographs. So this was the reason that I read the first one, was because I was looking for books that are about photographers or include photography but that are fiction. So that's how I came across the first one, and I read it, and it was one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read. Like, I loved that there were passages in it that I had to underline. I just absolutely loved it. And so this Christmas I asked for the second book, and here it is. So I'm looking forward to starting that one. The next two books I have to show you are ones I asked for because they're on my reading list for the semester of my university course, specifically for my literature module. First of all, I have a Shakespeare, Measure for Measure. I have only ever studied one Shakespeare, and that was The Tempest. I can't even remember. I studied it for GCSE English, and I haven't touched Shakespeare since. I didn't really care for Shakespeare then. So I'm intrigued to see how I find Shakespeare now, so many years later. I mean, what, like nearly 15 years later? Yeah, so we'll see. And the second one there that we have is Tennessee Williams, Suddenly Last Summer and Other Plays. Never done any Tennessee Williams, and I've not really studied many plays before. I have one or two plays on my TBR, now another one, but I've never really read very much in that area, so we'll see. For the non-fiction that I did ask for, that I knew I was going to be getting, the first one was Easy Beauty by Chloe Cooper Jones. I've heard mixed reviews about this, but I'm suitably intrigued that I wanted a copy. I also couldn't get it from my local library or my library at university, so I did ask for a copy. I mean, it's got this beautiful cover, which as a photographer had me completely drawn in. I am in a bar in Brooklyn listening to two men, my friends, discuss whether or not my life was worth living. So begins Chloe Cooper Jones's bold account of moving through the world in a body that looks different than most, born with a rare congenital condition called sacral agenesis. She must contend not only with her own physical pain, but the emotional discomfort of others. It's only when she unexpectedly becomes a mother that she confronts the demand to live life fully, propelling her on a journey across the globe, reclaiming the spaces she'd been denied, and denied herself. From Roman scriptures to a Beyoncé concert, and from a tennis tournament to the Cambodian killing fields, Jones interrogates the myths of beauty with spiky intelligence, aesthetic philosophy, love and humour, inviting us to find a new way of seeing. I mean, that has like so many of my buzzwords in it. Not only am I interested in chronic illness and living with chronic conditions, but I'm also interested in how these things cross over and how we draw on other themes to bring into it. So yeah, let's see how I get on with it. And then the final one that I knew about is yet another Umberto Eco. So I'm sure in this video or another video I've talked about Umberto Eco quite a lot, but with this one is the Book of Legendary Lands. So this one is looking at locations and places that are included in really famous stories and really famous myths and legends. So from the epic poems of Homer to contemporary science fiction, from holy scriptures to modern mythology and fairy tale, literature and art are full of illusory places we have at some time believed are real, and onto which we have projected our dreams, ideals and fears. Umberto Eco leads us on an illuminating journey through these legendary lands, Atlantis, Thule and Hyperborea, the Earth's interior and the land of cocaine, and explores utopias and dystopias where our imagination can confront concepts that are too incredible or too challenging for our limited real world. And this one is very glossy and includes a lot of pictures, so there's a lot of imagery to go with the text, so I'm quite looking forward to reading this one. So now we move on to the books that I didn't know I was getting, the ones that people have surprised me with, and I'm going to start here with my neighbour, she's such a lovely lady, but she works in a charity shop, and obviously she knows I'm really interested in books, so she often looks out for books for me. And this is the one that she's got me for Christmas, The Cat Who Saved Books by Sosuke Natsukawa. Natsuki Books was a tiny second-hand bookshop on the edge of town. Inside, towering shelves reached the ceiling, everyone crammed full of wonderful books. Rintaro Natsuki loved this space that his grandfather had created. He spent many happy hours there, reading whatever he liked. It was the perfect refuge for a boy who tended to be something of a recluse. After the death of his grandfather, Rintaro is devastated and alone. It seems he will have to close the shop. Then a talking tabby cat called Tiger appears and asks Rintaro for help. The cat needs a book lover to join him on a mission. This odd couple will go on 3 magical adventures to save books from people who have imprisoned, mistreated, and betrayed them. Finally, there is one last rescue that Rintaro must attempt alone. This is a heartwarming story about finding courage, caring for others, and the tremendous power of books. Now, I love the sound of the books. I'm not usually tempted to pick up books with cats in them, but yeah, really intrigued about that one. See how I like it. Not my usual thing, but we'll give it a go. Next, we have a couple of very random but quite timely non-fiction books. So I mentioned in a previous video that I had read a poetry book, about poetry and how to read poetry, and it was just a very short book, but it was explaining how poetry works, and I really didn't get on with it. It wasn't quite approaching it the way that I really wanted to. It was starting from a how poetry is structured position, looking at line beats and rhyming couplets and what would you even call it, the physical, the practical aspects of poetry. And I didn't like that. I wanted to understand how to read poetry in terms of understanding it and getting a feeling for it and interpreting it. And so I was given this, which is the Cambridge Guide to Reading Poetry by Andrew Hodgson. And today, after having received it, I've read the first chapter, and this one I'm really confident is going to be what I was looking for. It's really started from this place of how to understand poetry, and even not necessarily on first reading, but maybe noting down what you're taking away from it on your first reading it, and then reading it again and looking more at the rhythm. And yeah, so this one I think is going to be better, and I'm really looking forward to this year because one of my goals is going to be reading more poetry and getting a bit more out of poetry. So that was a very well-timed Christmas present that I wasn't expecting. And then the second one is really random. So String, Straight Edge and Shadow, the story of geometry. So it says, whether you're learning geometry for the first time, teaching it to students at home or in the classroom, or are parents helping your children through their first geometry course, this is a must-read for everyone. You will be fascinated with the graphic illustrations and written depiction of how the knowledge and wisdom of so many cultures help shape our civilization today. So yeah, it's the story of geometry along with actual geometry. And as someone who is interested in a multitude of crafts and creating things and printing and all that, that's actually quite an interesting one to have received, so looking forward to that one. And then we have a nice little mystery bag, which could have gone horribly wrong, but actually I'm really interested in all these books, so I'll show you them. The first one is a non-fiction, so we've got Agatha Christie by Lucy Worsley, and so this is a biography of Agatha Christie, and there is a TV series on at the moment. I don't have TV, we don't have an aerial, I don't have TV, so I haven't watched it, but I have been told how fantastic this documentary with Lucy Worsley is, so I'm really interested to read this actually. I've read 2 Agatha Christie so far, not particularly fond of her stories. So I've just finished And Then There Were None, because as I say, my family is really into Agatha Christie, so it feels like a Christmassy thing to me. So I read And Then There Were None, felt a bit disappointed, it's a good story, but I wanted a bit more. It's quite a quick read, it's not really very fleshed out. But I loved her tone, I loved her humour in it. She's incredibly racist, but I did love the humour that she brought in other places as well. So her as a woman, her as a person, I am really interested in, so I'm quite interested to read this. Then we have The Fortune Men by Nadifa Mohammed, which is shortlisted for the Booker Prize, I'm assuming in 2021, because I think this was published in 2021, and it's a paperback. Yeah, first published in 2021, so I'm assuming this was a 2021 shortlisted book. And I am interested in Booker Prize books, so yeah, this one says, Mahmoud Matten is a fixture in Cardiff's Tiger Bay, 1952, which bustles with Somali and West Indian sailors, Maltese businessmen and Jewish families. He is a father, chancer, petty criminal. He is many things, but he is not a murderer. So, when a shopkeeper is brutally killed and all eyes fall on Mahmoud, he isn't too worried. He has truth on his side and is innocent in this country where justice is served. It is only in the run-up to the trial that it will dawn on Mahmoud that he is actually in a fight for his life against conspiracy, prejudice and cruelty, and that the truth may not be enough to save him. Yes, that sounds really good. The next one was such a lucky stroke for my mother-in-law because it's the second book in a series and she didn't know whether or not I'd read the first book. And it is The House with the Golden Door by Elodie Harper. I haven't read the first book, but I do own the first book, which is The Wolf Den. And I have been keen to read it. This is also a signed by the author copy, which is rather nice. This may be my prompt to start The Wolf Den early in 2023. I think, I'm not sure whether January, but I certainly will be keener to start it than I perhaps was. I find that with Greek myth retellings or Greek myth adjacent, stories, I have to wait a little while. So I read one August, and so I think now I've waited the appropriate amount of time for me to read another Greek myth retelling. So maybe The Wolf Den might be started soon, and then I could, if I feel like it, go straight into this one and binge the next bit of the story. So that was a lovely one. Final one that she got me, and the final one on this list, the final one on this little book haul, is The Secret Diaries of Charles Ignatius Sancho by Patterson Joseph. I have heard of it, but I didn't know what it was about. But I also wanted to mention, before I actually tell you what it's about, the end papers. Look at those. Aren't they gorgeous? Anyway, so what is The Secret Diaries of Charles Ignatius Sancho about? It's 1746, and Georgian London is not a safe place for a young black man, especially one who has escaped slavery. After the twinkling lights in the Fleet Street coffee shops are blown out and the great houses have closed their doors for the night, Sancho must dodge slave catchers and worse. The man he hoped would help, a kindly duke who taught him to write, is dying. Sancho is desperate and utterly alone. So how does Charles Ignatius Sancho meet the king, write and play highly acclaimed music, become the first black person to vote in Britain, and lead the fight to end slavery? It's time for him to tell his story, one that begins on the tempestuous Atlantic Ocean and ends at the very centre of London life. And through it all he must ask, born amongst death, how much can you achieve in one short life? Oh, I've just seen who it is. I didn't realise. But look, it's an actor. Can you see him? Is it going to show him? I have seen him. Recently seen on Vigil and Noughts and Crosses. He's also starred in Peep Show. I've definitely seen him in Peep Show. And Law and Order UK. He plays Arthur Slugworth in the forthcoming Wonka movie. And this is his debut novel. Oh, I didn't realise it was him. There we have it then, guys. That is my full sort of wintry Christmas book haul. Merry Christmas, guys, and Happy New Year.